a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Marjani Rawls. We're talking all about the 1986 movie, The Fly, today. Do not confuse it with the one from the 50s, because that's definitely not what we're talking about, and I haven't seen that, so it would be a little tough to talk about that one. But Marjani, you told me this is the only Fly movie, so have you seen the 50s version, or the 50s movie by the same name?
I've seen the 50s version. Just a disclaimer here, the 1986 version is my favorite movie of all time. So, like, but I've seen it. It's the 50s version it's good for what it is. Like, the ending is probably like the most famous for, because like the person's like an actual fly, and then and they're like before a like brown spider eats him. So like, and it does the whole like, help me thing. It's good. I mean, like, it's more based off the short story, kind of like more of the mad scientist aspect of that. I've seen it. Of course, I think we just talked about The Fly 2. I don't really consider that a Fly movie. Like, it's, if you really want to just, I guess, complete the story and you have time to kill, you can watch like the Eric Stoltz one, but there's a reason that Gina Davis like refused to be in the second one. Like, it's, the drop off in quality is just horrible.
Yeah, you mentioned this was based off of a short story. Have you read that? I did not realize that going into this, so I did not end up reading that.
Yeah, I've read that. It's different. Like, in the short story they call it like the disintegrator regenerator, but like there's a different version to it. But it's good. Everybody should read it. Like, it's definitely like science fiction-y. It's a reason like where I think they named it one of the greatest like science fiction stories of not, but like it's good. Everybody should read it. Like, it's loosely based off, like, there's some elements in the 1986 version, but like Cronenberg kind of takes it in a different way when he did it when his rewrites for the script.
Yeah, so with this movie being directed by David Cronenberg, you have this director who has done quite a bit in sort of this horror realm. And I know Videodrome is a movie that people keep bringing up, and I have not watched it just yet, but don't worry, it is on my list of things to do. And then obviously he did The Dead Zone, which is a Stephen King adaptation. And I think he just really has a knack for these kinds of movies. And granted, I haven't seen everything in his filmography, and there's still a lot for me to dive into with Cronenberg. But when I was watching this, you could definitely get this sort of similar vibe to just how he directs his movies, especially after having watched The Dead Zone, for me anyway. So I found that very interesting. And then, you mentioned Gina Davis, Jeff Goldblum. Those are our two leads, and they're fantastic in those roles too. It's a movie in the 80s, but it's not one that necessarily feels like you couldn't imagine it just being in the present day at the same time. Obviously what he was working on was so far advanced, it's not something that actually exists still today. And who knows if teleportation is a thing that will ever exist. Well, it would be very convenient. It would, probably put a lot of people out of jobs.
Yeah, Cronenberg's also done like movies like The Brood, which I think you would, well, the final scene you would get squeamish for, but like that's a crazy horror movie. He did Scanners, Crash, which is a crazy movie. The fact that like the Fly movie is so closed off, like you only really spend time with three characters. You spend time with Seth, you spend time with Veronica, and you spend time with Status, and they're all at first, and there's like this Fatal Attraction-esque love triangle in the first act, but even with like Seth's like apartment, it's a whole different world. Like, you really kind of spend only some parts of the movie outside interacting with other people, but like with this whole mad scientist thing that Seth does, and Jeff Goldblum does a tremendous job, I think, portraying him. Like he's enclosed off into this world where he's working on this like teleportation thing, which is his life work. You know, here comes Veronica, who at first is like looking for a story, and then all of a sudden, like there's this chemistry between them that turns into like this twisted love story as she's trying to shake off her previous thing with her editor.
Yeah.
So like yeah, I love that like this whole story is just really it's really between Seth and Veronica, but like it's so enclosed that you just get immersed in these two characters.
And then you have Cronenberg, who makes a cameo as the gynecologist. So,
Which I thought was funny, yeah.
yeah. And then, I think in the second half of the movie, her editor, Stathis, I believe, that's such a weird name,
Yeah.
plays a more prominent role. And he's kind of just this gross dude who kind of just wants what he wants. And it's a very typical power move. And you also see Seth turn into that. It's like he becomes the exact opposite of everything he was before he went into the machine.
What's funny, because like you think about like Status and Seth, and there's two transformations here. So Status in the beginning of the movie is a very gross, using his whatever power he has left over Veronica, like sending the cover to Seth, like about the story, even like at the end of the first act, like propositioning Veronica is like, what about just sex? Like that's
Yeah.
like if you looking at it now, this is a Me Too story. Like this is a gross like sexual harassment story. Like they had this relationship, she's interested in somebody else, and he's doing everything that he is to kind of hold on to her. Like even like showering unannounced at her apartment, which was I'm like, wow, this is like I know this is the 80s, but this is very like Fatal Attraction, like I just said. But like even with Seth, like in the three acts, he's taken these like transformations. Like when you meet him in the first act, he's just kind of like this like quirky scientist, like his heart's in the right place. Maybe he's a little naive, but like he just really wants to change the world. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the moment of weakness, when Veronica goes back to state this to try to like break things off, he gets hasty, and he teleports himself, and then you start seeing the emotional transformation starts happening slowly with the physical thing. He becomes like jealous and very like impulsive and very like brash, and then that manifests into like the third act where he starts to change outwardly, where you see all these like disgusting changes, like the acne, losing his hair, losing his fingernails,
The fly legs like coming out of him.
the fly legs coming out of him, like
Or
throwing
just
up on it.
fly hair, I guess.
Yeah, like not being able to eat food, and like having to use enzymes to eat things, like eating sugar. Like I love how Cronenberg does like the little subtle things, like they're in the coffee shop and he's just pouring tons and tons of sugar in his coffee. Like it's slow, 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 but it gets more and more horrifying.
And I can't even imagine how many hours Jeff Goldblum had to sit in makeup and, get all of this stuff attached to him, because eventually he's in like this full bodysuit that just looks so disgusting. But, story wise, I agree with you. It was pretty well paced as far as how he was changing throughout the movie. Once you hit that moment where he gets in the machine and he comes back out, you can almost instantly tell that there's at least something a little different about him. But then it's like each time we see him, it's just being piled on. And then you have Veronica, who is trying to really figure out what's going on with him, because he's being so weird and awkward, which, given that he was weird and awkward when they first met,
Yeah.
isn't something that's too surprising, but she can tell it's amplified in some way. So you have her trying to, get this story from him, and she seems to be willing to work on it sort of long term. They fall in love, and then everything goes south from the moment he gets out of that machine. And the thing is, he becomes exactly like her editor. He becomes arrogant and he wants what he wants. And she ends up becoming this object to him, too.
Yeah, like think about it, right? Like in the beginning of the movie, he's just a story to Veronica, and then he turns into something more. But even with the interaction, like with Tawny when he goes to the pool bar, and he does the old arm wrestle thing where he breaks the guy's arm or breaks the guy's hand. Even then, it's all about the teleportation thing. You know, he goes through it again even before he sleeps with Tawny because it becomes like this drug to him. Like even right before then, when he does the whole gymnastics routine, he feels like it gives him some sort of superpower. And then from there, he just devolves into this creature. One of my favorite scenes in the whole film takes place in the third act when Veronica sees him for the last time and he goes in. This is after he goes into the bathroom and you see like kind of like the House of Horrors thing where he's you see all his appendages like the ear,
Mm-hmm.
I would think the thumbs. Like it was just like
It was like opening the fridge of a serial killer who takes trophies.
yeah. So if you notice, like every time that Verona goes back to see him, the distance between them is further and further, and it even goes to where he's talking like Seth does this thing where he tries to inject some humor into it. Like so he talks about the insect politics thing, but they're across the room from each other. They're having this dialogue and he basically says like, you got to leave or I'm going to hurt you if I stay. So he's like, I'm becoming more insect than man. The whole monologue of like, I was an insect who dreamt he was a human, which, I thought was just amazing. Like, I didn't notice this until like I watched it again. I'm like, you know what? Every time they've seen each other than, when he's like walking on stilts and he's like throwing up on himself and like he throws up himself for the first time, they're farther and farther away from each other, kind of like the divide of not only them two, but human and insect.
Yeah, it is really crazy just what they were able to do with this, given that it's an 80s movie too. And I was really impressed. At first, I went into this, I was like, okay, 1986, we'll see how it goes. But because of who was attached to it and everything like that, as I was watching it, I was just getting so engrossed in this story. And that moment you mentioned when they open the fridge and his like appendages are everywhere, you're kind of just like, okay, that's interesting. One of the things I did want to bring up specifically, though, is the fact that even though he merged with a fly, it didn't seem to affect his brain really, which I thought was an odd way to have him and a fly merge. You would think his brain would have diminished at a faster rate than it did, because he's still doing all of these crazy scientific things. But when you see that fridge scene, you're like, does he think he's going to be able to put these back on? Or, kind of like, what's going on here? Does he think he's going to be able to reverse this? And in that moment, you're like, oh, he's losing it.
It's interesting that you bring that up because now that I think about it and I kind of like wrote about it and thought about it a little bit, you see as the movie goes forward and as he kind of um, goes through the things, he goes through the stages, right? So he thinks that initially, because he doesn't see that anything is wrong with him, he's got like these superpowers. Like he's like, like he's the apex of man and he wants everybody else to kind of selfishly, everybody to go teleport themselves through the pod. Okay. So you had that. And then as he starts losing things like the computer doesn't even pick up his voice. Like he's like crawling on walls. Initially, he's scared. He's like, oh, okay, maybe this is a rare form of cancer. And then he comes to the realization, like he tries to rationalize it, like, all right, well, maybe there's a purpose for me getting sick or becoming a fly, or you know what I mean? Like he tries to turn it into his advantage. And then when he learns about the baby, which is another crazy subplot, um, it really now he turns into survival instinct of an animal. Now it's like, okay, I got to preserve what's human, what's left in human to me. And when Stasis conveniently like goes to the computer and finds out there's a third pod, he's merging himself, the baby, and Veronica together. It seemed to me as you got towards the end of the movie that he really is starting to kind of think of more of a fly. Like he's starting to like think more of, okay, how do I preserve whatever the hell this is of me to kind of live on? Because if you think about like when somebody gets terminally ill, right? They try to go all like, okay, well, like maybe there's a purpose for me to get sick. Maybe there's a purpose for me to die. And then with the baby or anything, they're like, all right, this is, I'm not going to be here, but this is the way I preserve my legacy. So that baby is basically Seth's legacy. Now it turns like crazy as like fusing all three of you together. How the hell are you going to live? You know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, like how do you like, how's that going to work? But then he starts like thinking irrationally again. And I think that's where the animal instinct comes in, where it's just one frame of thing. Okay, I have to preserve this.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can see that when you boil the story down, it's really about the scientist who wants to make a breakthrough and takes it way too far. And as soon as he starts changing, you're like, oh, this is not going to go well at all, because he got so in over his head that he couldn't undo anything that he did. And because he was by himself, well, he had the help of a baboon. So, you know, he wasn't totally by himself when he went in the machine,
Yeah,
but
I'm like, where do you get these baboons from? Like,
I know.
and one died. So I'm like, how does he explain that?
Yeah, I was like, okay, did they just not want to use monkeys for some reason? Or mice, you know, like the typical test subjects at the time?
Yeah, even I think, and I think I may have like showed you this, but like there's like a deleted scene where a lot of people got upset with the whole like monkey cat thing, where like he tried to like teleport like a monkey and a cat, and like it fused itself together. That, and there's a scene that's also cut where there's a fly appendage that comes out of Seth's like midsection, and he chews it off. So like I know that like when we talked about it, you were already like, oh, this movie's gross, but
It's mostly the last third of it that just amps up the gross factor, really. And you have these characters who you've grown to like, and you like Seth at the beginning. So to see him take that turn and just become this monster, basically, both in personality and in form, you're like, oh, well, you know, that's really a bummer, because by the end of it, Veronica is the only person you like, even though she does want to get an abortion. And they do try to make her unlikable at the end, too. So you have a whole lot of unlikable characters, or characters you're not supposed to like by the end of this. But I think Veronica still comes out on top.
yeah, that was by Cronenberg. That was an interesting choice. Like they're trying to have like the abortion in the middle of the night, where like even status is like, whoa, like maybe we should kind of like run tests. And even the doctor is like, hey man, like maybe we should. She's like, no, I want this out now. Like, have you seen Seth? Like, I've seen him, and he like, I want this baby out now. So like it's interesting to see like Cronenberg's choices and trying to show like a dislikable side to everybody. But I think at the end, like he tries to, I guess, redeem Seth a little, especially with the choice. I'm sure like we'll talk about it, but like I find it like redeemable as his last like stage or last morsel of humanity left in the choice that he made.
Yeah. Do you think that what Seth was doing was more out of him wanting to be the one to discover it, or did he really want to change the world? Because I feel like by the end of it, it's really hard to tell because he becomes so selfish.
I feel that in the beginning, Seth really has like a right way goal, as like he really did this, and found do this like this telebot thing as something that he really wanted to change the world and kind of do something. When he starts to be successful and he kind of gets Veronica, it's interesting because one thing in the movie triggers Seth to become uh like he doubt himself and to make a really bad choice. And it's funny how like when he's talking to the baboon about it, the fly is just there. The fly is just kind of insignificant. And even in the camera shots, like when he's kind of like down on himself, like when Veronica goes back to Stace, the fly just kind of like bounces around and it just lays on the window when nobody notices it. Like
Hmm.
it's the smallest thing that makes the most significant thing. And as Seth, gets this power and thinks that he, found an even bigger purpose, it destroys him. It destroys him emotionally that we sees, and it really destroys him physically, slowly. So like I think that in the second and third acts, it actually like he tries to keep pieces of himself like kind of like with the whole jokes and stuff,
Hmm.
but it turns him into a monster figuratively. And then at the end, old Seth kind of comes back with the whole, shotgun thing.
Did you ever find it weird that the fly took over such a high percentage of him, given that, humans are so much larger than flies in general?
Well, it was interesting, especially like the end of the third act where she like removes his jaw and like his face kind of like mutates, and I'm like, wow, he's just a full fly skeleton. Like,
Hmm.
how the hell did his DNA change? Like, I don't know, like the elapsed time that all these changes occurred, but I'm like, wow, his skeleton changed just like that. Yeah, that's actually a good question. I kind of like didn't think about. I think it's just kind of like survival, and I think Cronenberg talked about this because a lot of people thought that this was, especially it being in the '80s, being a metaphor for the AIDS epidemic, and
Okay.
really like he just kind of like went into like it's just basically about death and how death kind of comes for its all, and like being terminally sick and coming to grips with like you becoming sick with maybe a disease that you can't cure, even though you try to do the most irrational stuff possible. Like Seth tries to, at one point he tries to see if the computer can like unsplice the fly in himself, and the computer's like,
Right.
yeah, I can't do that. But like then he goes like full mad scientist, is like, all right, we're gonna fuse all three together. When you get sick and say like maybe like a cancer patient or something like that, they might go to alternative modes of medicine to try to cure themselves, or chemotherapy or stuff like that, just as the last
Hmm.
stage. And then you come to grips. I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna die anyway, so
Plus, because what he did was so drastic, he knew there was no way he could go to your everyday doctor and
yeah.
try and find a cure for this because it really was like his disease or cancer, so to speak, because he did something not realizing what exactly it would do to his body. And because he didn't see the fly, he had this variable that was unaccounted for. So he had never put two living things in there together. And obviously, it wasn't his intention to do that. He didn't know he was doing that. But at the same time, you can't help but wonder like, dude, if you just took a little more time with this and didn't get so impatient, maybe you wouldn't have turned into a disgusting fly.
It's almost like his punishment, right? Like for him making that one rash decision, like even with the steak, like he had comes like, okay, well, he says it like the computer is interpreting like the teleportation thing to be synthetic. Like even when Veronica eats the steak, she's like, "Oh, this is off." And even knowing like it's not ready yet, he still, you know, teleports himself. And like it's almost like with Cronenberg and like his rewrites, it's like a punishment to him for him making such a hasty decision. Like, dude, just like take your time. Like you just teleported a baboon and it didn't die. It didn't turn it inside out. So like you know what I mean? Like it's the whole like, all right, let's run this through human, animal trials. And even she says like maybe we should get the baboon tested. You know what I mean? Like to see if there are any like
Yeah.
anomalies. And he's like, no, 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 like let's celebrate. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, he seems fine.
Yeah. Where the hell the baboon go? That's what I'm saying. Like the baboon
I
that
don't
got
know.
yeah, the baboon was like he had like
Did
listened to
he eat
Seth.
it?
Yeah, like he listened to Seth and then like he was gone.
Yeah, you're kind of like, did he eat it or did he just let it go? It's unclear because as time goes on too, you see that his apartment just becomes more and more disgusting.
Oh yeah.
And I kind of want to backtrack a little here and talk about Seth and Veronica's relationship because I think that was something that was really good for Seth at the time. But then I think it made him overly confident because he was like, all right, I got the girl. I'm going to just go for this. And he wasn't being quite as modest anymore. Even before he got into the machine, he was like, oh, look, someone's interested in me and also interested in my work. But then when it came down to it and she didn't want to go into the machine, you still see this turn in him. And he's kind of like, well, fine then, sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because like the way Cronenberg does it, it's like even when he gets to the victory, like fully having Veronica and like having like a successful trial, it's like almost the beginning of his demise, like you said. Like she keeps telling him like, and they alluded it to. It was great how he did this, like when they're in bed and he has, the microchip that goes into his back, and that doesn't fully heal, and then you keep on seeing the hairs and they grow and they grow, and when he's like, all right, you should go through the teleporting thing, she's like, no, and she keeps on telling him like something's wrong, like you went through and you are not yourself, and he keeps on ignoring her. She tells him twice, so he's not listening to her. And you know what I mean, like it's funny how their relationship goes from like them being kind of like this partner, not only like these love interests in this partnership where before this even happens she's like, all right, we should go on a vacation together. uh he starts to tune her out and goes into this madness of this science experiment. It's fascinating. Even when he like brings it, he's even willing to go to the bar and find like some random woman to like even to do the whole teleporting thing. He kind of like discards her. It's crazy.
Yeah, he uses her and then wants her to do something for him. And it's like, that's not how this works.
Yeah, the men with Veronica are very shitty. Like like she has a bad taste in men. Like Seth started off cool, and he literally turned into a monster, and then Status is just a perverted creep, and he becomes like, since he was there before, uh, he becomes like a shoulder to cry on for her, which is kind of fucked up in its own right because like what he was saying to her before, but she has nobody else to turn to.
Yeah, you want Veronica to come out on top, but in a way, she still loses in the end. This is a total lose lose situation for everyone involved.
Oh yeah, nobody wins. Like she loses Seth basically because he fuses with the damn pod, and she kills him because there's no humanity left, and she's left with status. So like with how the movie ends, I love the movie. It just ends abrupt with her crying, with the pods kind of like shutting down and everything, because there's no happy ending. Like there's no like nobody comes out on top. Nobody There's just no like solace for everybody. Like everybody was intertwined into like this really messed up situation, and that's how it ends. Like I would hate for it to be, I think, the original ending where like she like goes home and she dreams and like there's like this butterfly, like this weird butterfly thing. I think he made the right choice and ended abrupt and it just go fade to black that way.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about the alternate ending, if you will.
Look it up. It's very weird. Like it's very like tries to like it's like this like whole butterfly baby coda that like happens, but I'm glad they cut it out. It's super cheesy.
Yeah, I think the ending they went with was probably the best one given what they're working with as far as how the characters have progressed and how the story has progressed. Because in a movie like this, you don't need a happy ending. In fact, I don't think you want one because then it might feel less satisfying.
Yeah, I don't okay because like when you think about it, you know, is like you touched on earlier, like is anybody really redeemable? Like you understand where Veronica is coming from. She's looking at the father of her child basically mutate into a fly human hybrid. But even when status is like telling her like, whoa, let's see if this is really true. She's just hastily like, hey, no. I want this out. I want this out right now. He's like in the middle of the night. And he's like, yeah, I want this out. It's weird because they put him as him being the irrational one. And this is the guy who wanted to just have like some friends with benefits uh situation just to keep Veronica around. And then, you have Seth who's basically pushing the only person that like loves him away because he's becoming this creature and he's giving in to being the creature. So, like you kind of with how it ended and him wanting that mercy killing, you kind of do feel sorry for him. But you also remember like dude, like every like your choice kind of got you here. You know what I mean? Like you didn't have to go through the pod. Like you didn't really have to get so jealous. Like she said she was coming back. She said she was like only like gone for a few hours. If you'd have delayed the celebration, like you wouldn't have been in this position. But like his his mania drove him to basically becoming a human fly.
What's funny or ironic, I guess you could say, is that all of this is his own doing. Nobody made him do any of this. And I feel like his apartment was the only one in this warehouse.
Yeah.
Like maybe this was a little before the time when they really started renovating warehouses and turning them into apartments, because how could nobody notice what's going on or all this noise and rampage coming from his apartment? Plus, those machines probably sucked up the electricity from the
Yeah.
entire building.
Yeah, like think about it. Like
And it was always so deserted when they would pull up. It's like there was no parking and they would just kind of just park in the middle of the drive there.
yeah, even when he takes the taxi back with Tawny, like it's just all desolate. It just like it looks like a bunch of warehouses. Like he has a warehouse home. Even when the movie starts, like it starts at that whole conference. Like it drops you right in to what the story is going to be. There's really just like, Seth and
Yeah.
Veronica just meeting. But like it's funny because one thing I noticed as the movie goes on, the his warehouse, I guess his warehouse apartment, it gets darker and darker. Like they're like it becomes like less and less light. So
I did notice that.
yeah, like I thought that was a really cool like twerk. But I'm like, wow, like with him being a scientist, and I'm like, how's he? I guess somebody's bankrolling this, right? Like he mentioned, like the company that he was working for.
Yeah, he did mention funding. He also mentioned that they don't really ask him too many questions because he's pretty quiet about his work, and he kind of just puts his head down and goes about his thing at the beginning. But then I have to imagine that they would have cut him off at some point after he just, stopped showing up and, wasn't reporting in or whatever.
Yeah, I think status. He mentioned that he's been at it for like 6 years, and then like when he was 20, he almost like did like, he almost won an award, but like came up short. So I thought that was another interesting wrinkle where like Seth, his previous failures, kind of when he saw that like something was actually successful, he just was kind of like a runaway train towards it. Like he just didn't know where to stop. And I think it was an interesting commentary on kind of like success and like where like you just kind of lose your brain kind of like chasing after the other one. So yeah, it's I'm like, wow, like that's a pretty roomy warehouse apartment that he has. Like, you know what I mean? Like he has
Yeah.
even though it comes really really disgusting at the end, like you see all like the food, and you got to imagine like he starts like oozing enzymes at the end. Like it had to smell like Veronica like even mentions like you smell terrible. Like
Yeah, visually, they really nailed the look and feel of every moment in this movie. At the conference, everything's nice and bright. When he takes Veronica back to his apartment, she kind of has this feeling that something might happen, but then he ends up being a nice guy. And you see how well lit everything is when he's showing off his machines. And then it just gets darker and darker, like you said, but not only do they nail the visuals of the body horror and everything that they put Jeff Goldblum through in this, but they also just nail the dingy look of the warehouse, because by the end of it, it looks like a disgusting warehouse that you wouldn't want to live in.
yeah, it's funny like all like the environment around stuff kind of degrades with him. Like it just looks dingy and dark and almost like disturbing. You know what I mean? Like it's like a real like I thought about like the whole like like the whole Frankenstein type thing where he's like kind of like in the lab and he's down in the basement and it's just like
Hmm.
cobwebs and you know what I mean, like until he like has like its alive moment. Everything just starts, yeah, everything just even at the end, like the last time that she visits him, furniture's broken. Like you know what I mean, like he's in the bathroom, body parts are everywhere, and the only thing that's clean or the only thing that's lit up is the pods. And that's interesting too because I'm like, where the hell did he get the third pod? Like, was it there? Like,
I think it was the prototype
yeah, it was the prototype.
that he had still covered up,
Yeah.
which would explain a lot too.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
not gonna
no,
go
I'm
in
not going
that.
to go in that.
And like, I'm like, how did he attach this? So yeah, like, how did he like
Yeah.
piece this all together? He doesn't have really at the end like his fingers fused together. He's lost some thumbs.
Clearly, he had the baboon do it and then got rid of him.
Yeah. So I'm like, how did he do all this? But yeah, it's interesting where like everything's not well lit, and even the stages of his face, like acne, and then like his teeth become sharp, and he starts to lose hair, and then he gets more like pimply and bubbly, and like he has this like nervous tick. It's amazing how they did this with practical effects.
Which is probably why they won an Academy Award for it.
Oh yeah, like Chris Wallace and I think Stephen Duplice or Duplice. I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, but like yeah, well deserved. And then of course the score by Howard Shore, like it they allude to it in the beginning when they do the reveal, and then it comes the full thing at the end. Like the score is amazing, and like it just seems like everything just came together.
Yeah, the Brundlefly was such a great piece of work for this movie because they actually started with the final version and then kind of worked their way backwards for what Jeff Goldblum would look like going through these different stages of changes. And They did a really nice job, and I say that because they totally grossed me out by the end of it. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. I recently watched the Tales from the Dark Side movie, and in the final segment of that, you have this transformation there too. And I was
Oh
like,
yeah, she turns into like some
the
like
gargoyle.
gargoyle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, that was gross and well done, but this topped that.
she doesn't lose an ear.
Yeah, but this topped that so much, and I was just really impressed with what they were able to do with that.
Like even like the subtle like moments that he has in the bathroom by himself when he doesn't make the transformation, where he's like, "What the hell is going on?" Where he's pulling off like fingernails, and then he's like seeing all like the enzymes kind of flow through like his fingers, and he's like, "Oh my
Oh yeah,
god!" Like
that was
he's
nasty.
yeah, and he's like, "Oh my god!" Like, am I dying? And when she goes to see him, and you see his even the enzymes go through his flannel shirt, I'm like, ugh, like this guy is just becoming ugh. You know what I mean? Like, and then it seems like
Yeah.
it gets a little better. Like he puts a shirt on, but he's just all like tumory, and he's even walking like almost like the Hunchback of Notre Dame thing, which I thought like it was funny because the Hunchback is all secluded in the tower, and he's secluded here in the
And he keeps going
warehouse.
up to the roof too.
Yeah, they're like, and he sees her, the whole like, I want the baby out. Yeah, he sees her from the roof. Like it's cool, like what Cronenberg uses and like the kind of like the story motifs that he uses throughout the whole like Fly story.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, pulling out fingernails will never not be gross.
Yeah, that was like, I'm like, dude, did that hurt? Like, you know what I mean? Like you pull that out, like I would imagine like the part of your finger has to hurt for a while. But then again, like when he's like typing into the computer, he does wear gloves. So he does find gloves to wear so he doesn't lose any more fingernails.
Yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts on this? I think for me, I just really liked how they kept this a tight cast. You really only have three characters that you need to pay attention to for the entirety of the movie. And then you mentioned Tawny earlier, and we mentioned that Cronenberg makes an appearance as the gynecologist. But in the grand scheme of things, those are character bits that don't necessarily play into too much of the storyline, because by the time Seth ends up with Tawny, we already know he sucks
Oh,
and he's been horrible to Veronica.
he becomes a dick. Like the whole like,
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to be like the dynamic duo, then I'll find somebody who will. Like I'm like, dude, like you completely discarded the whole relationship just because like you think like some this experiment enhanced you. Meanwhile, Veronica's like, no, something's wrong. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm cutting hairs out of you. I went to a doctor,
Hmm.
and these are insect hairs, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you? And he's like, you're jealous. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so his manic state completely takes over his rationality state. Like, it becomes so much for him to have this experiment go right that he just completely becomes a dick. And like at that point, I'm like, damn, Veronica can't catch a break with men. Like you know what I mean? Like,
Not at
yeah,
all.
yeah, he's got a horn dog and then like an ass. You know what I mean? So yeah, like I said in the beginning, this is my favorite movie of all time. Uh, it's only 96 minutes. It's you know what I mean? Like, and that's a far cry.
It's a good length for it. Yeah.
You don't even feel it. Like you kind of like it's just a quick tight thing between like a certain amount of characters. You don't need a lot more than that. It's a far cry from I guess from horror movies now, which are like 2 hours and 45 minutes. I don't know if you've seen It Chapter Two yet, but like that's
Not just
yeah,
yet,
that
but
that's
yeah,
it.
it's 2 hours and 50 minutes. But then you have things like Ready or Not that fall under the two
Which are
hour mark,
quick.
and you're like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's extremely well done. It for Cronenberg, I think this is his most monetarily successful movie. I'm a big Cronenberg fan. He's like I said, like he's super into body horror. Like
Yeah.
if you watch Videodrone with with basically the gun that comes out of the guy's stomach, or if you watch Naked Lunch where people are like literally turned into bugs, or Crash where like people get off on car crashes. This is basically the this is basically like the run of the mill for him. But I think as a story, uh as like this whole tragic situation, this is his best work.
Yeah. Plus the fact that it was done on a $10 to $15 million budget is amazing given the makeup and the effects and all of that, months of work probably went into those, and then it made 60 million at the box office, which, to quadruple your money, I think a lot of studios would take that any day.
Which is crazy because like he did like an interview in 2016 where he said that he's thinking about he's retiring because he was getting like difficulty financing his films. And I'm like, dude, if you look at all his films, like even to like A History of Violence, they're not big budgets. Like horror would love that. Like look at like Paranormal Activity that was made for like $100,000, or like these like small budget horror movies. Like like studios would love that. Like Blumhouse or New Line or anybody like that. Like they would love to do that. And I'm like, oh well, that sucks.
Yeah, and even though not all of his movies have made as much as this one did, they've still made at least some money. It's not like they've all been total flops. To me, as long as you're in the black, basically, with your movie, if you make more than what your budget was, I think that's a good sign, especially given how many movies lately haven't been doing that. You'll see some that they just overspent completely. I mean, Dark Phoenix is a good example of this. And that is a huge movie that has huge studio, a huge cast behind it, and you would think that would have done well, but it didn't. So I think taking a risk on these small to mid-budget movies, especially for something like you said, Blumhouse, it seems like a win-win almost, because even if you lose money, you're not going to be losing nearly as much money as any company putting out Dark Phoenix would.
Yeah, I just think like a lot of his films too, like a lot of them are very, very weird.
Well,
You know what I
yes,
mean?
there is
Like,
that.
yeah, like you know what I mean? Like The Brood. You know what I mean? You have small children like eating and killing
Yeah.
people, and like this like
And I haven't seen Naked Lunch, but that did totally flop. He spent,
yeah.
the studio spent 17 to 18 million and it only made less than 3. So, you're going to have movies like that though, and it's kind of something that has just been accepted in the film world. I mean, look at Dino De Laurentiis and how many flops he had to have before his company went out of business. It was quite a few, most of them being Stephen King adaptations, ironically.
Yeah. Well, I feel like because like Naked Lunch is based on like a novel.
Hmm.
Like think about like just to say like what the movie's about. Like it's basically people getting high off insecticide and like insecticide, and like people turn like looking at bugs, like looking at like centipedes. It's a very weird movie that like may do well like critically, but at the box office it's not really it wouldn't command like a high like a lot of people like seeing it. You know what I mean? Like Dead Zone it was made for what like 7 million and made like 20 million. A lot of people love it, but like his movies don't really lend as like these big like box
Theatrical
office things.
releases, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like his have earned him a cult following through home video releases, basically, or, DVDs and Blu rays these days as things become, formatted for those. And I was just looking here, and his last 2 movies Cosmopolis and Maps to the Stars are two movies I've never even heard of. So I think a lot of it has to do with the studios being like, oh, well, this is a small to mid-budget movie. We're not going to market it as much because you've kind of spent all of your budget. And, you know, with social media now, it shouldn't cost you millions upon millions of dollars to market a movie and get people seeing it. Or even, you know, maybe Cronenberg should consider doing something like signing a deal with Netflix, because then you don't necessarily need billboards. And I know Netflix has done billboards, and we're getting totally off track here, but I would love to see more Cronenberg movies. And luckily, I have not seen anything other than The Fly in the Dead Zone, so I have my work cut out for me.
No, I think it's pretty much all,
Oh, I maybe saw Crash, but yeah, there's a lot there for me to watch.
yeah. Crash is out. Yeah, it's out there. No, it's just to like go back to your point. I think Netflix would be perfect for him. Netflix will spend the money. You know what I mean? They're right there. Like other than like The Irishman or like big releases like Roma and stuff like that. Like you don't really need like a huge budget because people have already subscribed to it, and he can make the movies that he wants to make. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I think a lot of people have talked about this. Like I think they talked about like small budget movies, and I think like Booksmart, like great, you know what I mean, like great reviews, like 100% or close to that. Not a lot, not really big box office, and I'm like thinking like I don't know if it's really like the marketing. I think like we talk about movies like Avengers Infinity War who have these massive marketing budgets, and it's just like if you're a smaller movie, like you got to find other ways to kind of do it because at the box office those movies are going to dominate other than just word of mouth. Like you know what I mean? Like you'll tell me about a movie and I'm like, all right, like if Deanna's telling me to go see it, like I trust her, like I'll go see it. And then like critics are still kind of important, but yeah, I agree with you. Like Cronenberg should definitely look into Hulu or the tens of streaming services that are coming out. Like they
Yeah.
just announced another one today, so
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of big famous directors sign these kind of deals. If I'm not mistaken, Ryan Johnson just did that.
yeah. And even Ryan Murphy, like something like with Netflix exclusive deal of like something like I think $300 million to
Yeah.
do
And
stuff
Shonda
at
Rhimes
Netflix.
too.
Yeah, they got Shondaland over there. So like I definitely think that while box office is still king, obviously like if you're seeing Disney lately, they have dominated the box office. But Netflix and things like those things like let's say directors like David Cronenberg or maybe like a John Carpenter or Ridley Scott, like those guys who, maybe can't get like things financed and whatnot, can go to a Netflix and just kind of do it there.
Or go to Shudder because it's all horror, you know?
Yeah, Shutter's doing Creepshow. Like they're financing Creepshow. Like just
Yeah.
go do there. Like you know what I mean? Like it's $3 a month. It's a deal.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to wrap this up. Before we go, though, I want to tell all of you about our Patreon. You can support this podcast for $1 a month. That will get you a shout out on the show, or $5 a month. You can pick a topic for me and a guest to cover. You can also find us at Geekdom Pod on Twitter, at Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. Mirjani, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this today.
Thank you for bringing me back. It's always been a pleasure.
Of course. And as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.